Welcome, everybody. Let's start with opening prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us to another meeting. Thank you for continually being with us. Please give us more understanding of the message and to give us a clear understanding of the message that we have learned already so that we can be able to teach it to others. Please be with us. Please give us a Holy Spirit and the fruits of the Spirit. We love you. Thank you for first loving us. Amen.
Welcome everybody to Youth Prophecy Group meeting 126. We are the Flucuses and you're in the YPG meeting room.
So the title of today's lesson is Revisiting World War II. This is a part 2 of our last lesson that we did last month, lesson 125.
In this lesson, we will study the events of World War II and see how they parallel both the Diadochi and the Information War in our history.
In 1929, the year of dictators, as I like to call it, Hitler. In 1929, there were 3 dictators that really began to rise to power that would ultimately lead to World War II. In Germany, that leader was, of course, Adolf Hitler. Since Germany's humiliating defeat in World War II, or World War I, the country was struggling economically to pay what they were being forced to for repairs and compensation to the winning countries. And Germans were very upset, of course. Then in mid-1929, the Great Depression hit. And this was not good because it affected more than just the United States. One of the countries it affected was Germany because the US had lended Germany money. And now, since the US really needed the money, it tried to get it back. And this just really hurt Germany's situation even more. The Nazi Party had been steadily growing throughout this time in popularity because of all the chaos that was happening, and Hitler used the chaos, especially of the Great Depression, to gain more numbers to his party or to his cause. In the election, well, Hitler, one of the things he did was say democracy was the cause of all of their problems, and so he was, as we know, he wasn't for democracy, so he would use that tactic to try to bring the people in, as well as the fact that the people were already not working. There was a whole lot of unemployment and a lot of other problems that Germany went through. In the elections of 1939, the Nazi Party became the second. Sorry, that's a typo. 1929, the Nazi Party became the second biggest party in the German government, and by early 1933. Hitler had been appointed the Chancellor of Germany and basically made himself a dictator right after that happened. So, because of what had happened in the US, because of the consequences of World War I, the German people really succumbed to the Nazi Party. That's how Hitler got influenced, and then he made himself the dictator. So, 1929, Hitler's party becomes the second biggest in the German government.
So in 1929, Stalin exiled his most prominent opposer, Trotsky, from the Soviet Union. By the time Trotsky was exiled, he'd worked with Lenin in the Russian Revolution and was unpopular and had no power. He opposed Stalin's policies and the fact that he was turning into a dictator. Trotsky wasn't the only person Stalin silenced. He also got rid of other people until after 1930, there was no one to oppose him. So in 1929, it was not only Hitler becoming a dictator, but it was also Stalin becoming a dictator.
Also in 1929, Mussolini signed the Lateran Treaty. He signed it with the papacy so the Catholics would support him and respect him, and so he could gain control over them. And this was one of the events leading up that led up to the beginning of the war. And Mussolini was a dictator, so by signing the Lateran Treaty, he became even more of a dictator. So in 1929, we had the three dictators, Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini.
The Spanish Civil War. Before World War II started, there was a proxy war, which was the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939. On July 18th of 1936, the right-wing military officers rebelled against the left-wing government, nationalists versus Republicans, respectively. General Francisco Franco was the leader of the nationalists. The monarchy had been disbanded in favor of a republic back in 1931, but there was still a lot of tension between both political sides, and in early 1936, the government had become largely left-wing. That's what led to the beginning of the Revolution in July. In 1937, Franco put the nationalist forces under Spain's France's parties, like under their commander. Well, he was the commander, but like under their control. While the Republican forces went to the communist banner. Franco was aided by Hitler and Mussolini, while the Republicans were aided by Stalin and a group of communists from all around the world, including communists from the US, called the International Brigade. Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin were fighting for their ideologies to take over Spain. So, like I said, Hitler supported Franco, fascists, and Stalin supported the government as it was, the Republicans, which were communists. In 1939, France and the France. Franco and the fascists won after the Republicans finally surrendered the capital of Madrid on March 28th. So this ended the 10-year preparation from 1929 to 1939, which was preparation for World War II. That's Franco. So as we can see, the 10 years began in 1929 with the rise of Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini, or rise or like consolidation of power. Then there was a 10-year period, and part of that was a proxy war between fascism and communism, ending in 1939.
On August 23rd, 1939, Germany and the USSR signed a pact. It was known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact because it was signed by foreign ministers Ribbentrop from Germany and Molotov from the USSR. Germany needed this pact with the USSR to wage war with the West. There were two parts to the pact. The first part was regarding non-aggression between the two countries, and that's the part that everybody in the world knew about. But the second part, the part that nobody knew about, was that Hitler and Stalin had redrawn the maps, splitting up Europe into two sections, one under the sphere of influence of the USSR and the other under Germany. So on August 23rd, 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed.
In September of 1939, World War II began. In his pursuit to take control of Europe, Hitler had decided to invade Poland. He planned to invade on August 26th of 1939, but the day before, which would be August 25th, Britain had signed a pact with Poland promising to defend Poland and keep it independent. So Hitler decided that he needed an excuse to invade Poland. On August 31st, German soldiers dressed as if they were from Poland staged an attack on a German radio station which was on the border between Germany and Poland. The Germans claimed that this was an attack by Poland on their country, and the next day they retaliated. The invasion began at 500 the invasion began at 5:45 a.m. when German planes began bombing Polish towns. Both Britain and France, who supported Poland, declared war on Germany and officially began World War II. On September 17th, the Soviet Union also invaded Poland, and Poland was forced to surrender in early October. So on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, putting itself in opposition to three allies, France, Britain, and Poland. And Germany was also backed by the USSR.
August of 1940. In February of 1940, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the economic agreement. Soviet Union agreed to send Germany a lot of stuff like oil, petroleum, copper, chrome, platinum, lumber, grain, and a whole lot else. Do you want to give that a question? Oh, yes, we have a question. Is the Ribbentrop Pact a foreshadowing of the Berlin Wall? Not really. The Ribbentrop Pact was, when we combine the lines, you'll see it doesn't actually line up with 1989. Do you? So no, it's not foreshadowing of the Berlin Wall. Um, that's what I would say. I see. Okay. Yeah, you can hear us. Okay. I'm sorry, someone said they were frozen. Okay, yeah, I hope we'll come back to talking about what this parallels in our time, of course, but thank you for your question. Okay, I will. The economic agreement. The Soviet Union agreed to send like a lot of stuff, supplies, lumber, magnesium, a whole bunch of metals and stuff. In exchange, Germany was going to send the Soviet Union plans for the ship Bismarck and other like heavy naval guns and other gear. On your screen is one of the ships. Later that year, however, in August of 1940, Stalin began to worry that Nazi Germany was doing too well in the war, and therefore the war, World War II, would be over too soon. And if that happened, Germany would not be weakened; instead, it would be stronger. And even for the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, we all know they didn't like each other, so he wanted Germany to be weakened, not strengthened. So, also along with that, Nazi Germany wasn't really sending the plans. Um, Hitler didn't want Stalin to have the plans because Hitler knew that he was going to invade the USSR as well. So he was like, at least as I can give them as possible, that would be great. So Stalin suspended the trade agreement for a little while, just briefly, but it was quickly resolved. So in 1940, in August, there was a trade suspension between USSR and Germany, but it didn't last very long at all. Suspends trade. And just to be a little bit clear, this is not the same pact as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. There's two. This one's just about trade.
On June 22nd, 1941, Germany officially broke the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Hitler invaded the Soviet Union that very afternoon. The invasion went under the code name Operation Barbarossa. It began with bombing major cities and airstrikes which won Germany ground. Ultimately, however, the USSR pushed back. This began the Eastern Front, which is the war between Germany and Russia, of World War II. June 22nd, 1941, Operation Barbarossa.
1945, Nazi Germany defeated. In 1945, World War II ended. The two sides in the war were the Allies and the Axis powers. The Axis powers were led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. On the other side, the Allies were led by the UK or Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. There were several other countries on both sides, such as France and Poland on the Allies side and Hungary and Romania on the Axis side. However, in 1945, Germany was defeated. The Soviet Union attacked Berlin from which was the capital of Germany, from the east. So on the map, you see Berlin right here, close to the east side of Germany. The Soviet Union attacked from that side, and the United States attacked from the west side of Germany. On April 30th of 1945, as Soviet forces neared Hitler's bunker where he was commanding his German army, he committed suicide. With their leader dead, on May 9th, all of Germany surrendered. Japan, the last Axis power, held out during the summer of 1945, but was eventually defeated and surrendered on September 2nd. With none of the Axis powers remaining, World War II had officially ended. So in 1945, Germany was defeated, and then Japan later was defeated as well. And so all the Axis powers had been defeated, and World War II was over.
After the end of World War II, there were two superpowers, the USA and the USSR. Although they had fought on the same side of the war, that partnership ended quickly. The Cold War began in 1945, although some people do say like push it to 1947. But for the purposes of our line, we're gonna say the Cold War began in 1945, and it did not end until 1989. Both countries tried to extend their influence and hold on to their territory. A good example of this is the Iron Curtain and how Germany was essentially split between the Soviet Union and the United States until the Berlin Wall fell. There were no outright wars between the USA and the USSR in this time, but there were proxy wars, challenges, and a lot of tension, like the Korean War, the space race, the Vietnam War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. I believe that picture is from the Korean War. And of course, the other one is a rocket launching. So after the World War II ended, there was a Cold War until 1989.
And then in 1989, the Soviet Union lost all of its sphere of influence, specifically on November 9th, 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell. That was just the beginning of the fall of the Soviet Union. In 1989, the end of the Cold War, when the USSR loses all but Russia.
World War III. The 10 years before 1989 parallel the events before World War II. From 1979 to 1989, the United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in proxy wars in Afghanistan and Syria. Proxy wars are where two sides or two outside countries are helping opposing sides of a war. And in a picture, we have two people, or technically they're robots, but let's pretend they're people. We have two sides fighting, and then we have two outside influencing that fight. So that's what a proxy war is. So in this case, from 1979 to 1989, the United States would be helping one side in an Afghan war or in the war in Syria, and the USSR would be helping the opposite side. So it's essentially the United States fighting the USSR through another war. And these proxy wars will mark the beginning of the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, or the United States and Russia, that we see today. And the 10 years from 1979 to 1989 parallel the 10 years from 1929 to 1939 before World War II. From 1929 to 1939, we saw steps being taken that would eventually lead to World War II. And the same was happening in 1979, except that time it was leading to World War III. So on the line, we have 1979 to 89, the two proxy wars.
(1989). The time of the end is the next waymark. 1989. In World War II, the Spanish Civil War ended in 1939, and that, as we just heard, parallels 1989. A proxy war ended on the peace line in that year as well. The Soviet-Afghanistan War, which we just saw, began in 1979, and that ended in 89, paralleling the Spanish Civil War before the beginning of the line of World War II. In the line of powers in Macedonia, Demetrius frees Athens, which happened in 307, and in the line of powers in Italy, Thurii appeals to Rome. And this is signifying countries changing, well, the line of powers, it signifies countries changing their allegiance from Tarentum to Rome. And Rome was the north, we know, and Tarentum was the south. These events show how the USSR was falling and many countries allied with the United States instead of staying with the USSR. So the year 1989 was the end of the proxy war, the Soviet-Afghan War, and the Cold War, also that we just saw before. And there's also when countries went from the side of the USSR to the side of the United States. I believe I'm just saying this wrong. Did I say Tarentum?
Yeah, Tarentum. It's Tarentum.
I knew that sounded weird. That sounded weird. I'm sorry. Okay. So 1989 was end of the proxy wars, also when countries started to change their alliance from the south to the north, the USSR to the USA. It's Tarentum.
The line of Pyrrhus in Italy shows us that Tarentum, the king of the south, would attack one of his former spheres of influence because they tried to ally with Rome, who was the king of the north. In 2014, Russia, the king of the south, attacked Ukraine by invading Crimea. They did this because the people had elected Viktor Yanukovych, who acted pro-Western, to be president in 2010. When he got in office, he started to ally closer with Russia, and in February of 2014, many of the Ukrainians protested. He was removed from office, then he fled to Russia, and the temporary government of Ukraine charged him with crimes. Yanukovych asked Putin to restore peace in Ukraine, so Putin sent Russian soldiers and they invaded Crimea, or they took over Crimea, which was a part of Ukraine, by the end of March in 2014. According to the line of Pyrrhus in Macedonia in World War II, there was an alliance between the King of the North and the King of the South at this same waymark. The King of the North used his alliance when it fought against the Western Front. So in our time, there was an alliance between Trump and Putin in 2014 that Trump will later use in his war with the Western Front, which is the U.S. government. So in 2014, there were two main points: the invasion of Ukraine, which was the king of the south attacking one of its spheres of influence, or Russia invading Ukraine, which was a sphere of influence. And then there was collusion between the king of the north and the king of the south, which is Trump and Putin.
(2016) Trump versus Clinton. 2016 parallels 301 BC, 280 BC, and September 1, 1939. In 301, the Battle of Ipsus took place, and that's when Antigonus, Pyrrhus, and Demetrius fought against the three allies, Seleucus, Cassander, and Ptolemy. Antigonus was defeated and killed by the allies. In 280 BC, Pyrrhus arrived in Tarentum and began to prepare the city for war. And lastly, in 1939, Germany, who was allied with the Soviet Union, invaded Poland. This act led to France and Britain, who supported Poland, to declare war on Germany. So each of those three events parallel 2016 in our history. with the events in 2016 reflecting those former dates. In 2016, Trump and Clinton were running for president. We know that Russia was involved in the 2016 election because they waged an information war or information campaign to support Trump. Clinton represents Antigonus, Trump represents Demetrius, and Russia represents Pyrrhus, or you could say Putin represents Pyrrhus. Clinton lost the election just like Antigonus was killed in battle. Both Demetrius and Pyrrhus remained to fight against the Allies. And in 2016, both Trump and Putin remained, and they were fighting against the three branches of government representing the three allies, three branches of US government. Additionally, a key part of the Battle of Ipsus were the war elephants that led to Antigonus's death. In our history, elephants can represent information. Now, although it was the Allies' elephants that killed Antigonus, and in 2016 it wasn't the government's information that made Clinton lose, but rather it was Russia's information that made Clinton lose. We can still make a parallel that elephants or information caused the downfall of Clinton. That's how 301 BC parallels 2016. But what about 1939? That's when World War II began. And there were three allies, Poland, Britain, and France, who opposed Germany, who was backed by the Soviet Union. Similarly, in 2016, there were three branches of US government who were opposed by Trump, and Trump was being helped by Russia. So Trump represents Germany, the Soviet Union represents Russia, and the three allies represent the three branches of government. Lastly, in 280 BC, Pyrrhus began to prepare for war. Now, although the primary method of war in World War III, our time, is information warfare, in 2016, Putin created the National Guard of Russia, which is a direct physical war parallel to Pyrrhus. So in 2016, the Battle of Ipsus, we had three branches of government versus Trump and backed by Russia.
Heraclea. The next waymark on our line that we see from these lines, the lines of World War II and Pyrrhus, is 2018. From the line of Pyrrhus in Macedonia, this is when Pyrrhus invaded Thessaly in 291. And from World War II, this is when the trade agreement between Nazi Germany and the USSR was temporarily stopped. We call this waymark Heraclea, though, from the Battle of Pyrrhus in Italy in 280, which is where Pyrrhus defeated Rome for the first time. So all of this points to the tension between Trump and Putin, Putin being the king of the South, Trump representing the king of the North, where Putin gets the upper hand or silences Trump. Heraclea, 2018.
The Battle of Asculum. On the priest line, 2019 lines up with 289 and 288 BC, 279 BC, and 1941. In history, from 289 to 288 BC, Demetrius ravaged Pyrrhus' country of Pyrrhus. Demetrius was the king of the north, and Pyrrhus was the king of the south, so this was another victory for the king of the north. The Battle of Asculum was in 279 BC, where, thanks to his elephants, Pyrrhus, who was the king of the south, defeats Rome, who was the king of the north. Lastly, in 1941, Germany, the king of the north, ravaged Russia, the king of the south, in Operation Barbarossa. So in 2019, according to Asculum, the king of the south, which is Putin, defeated the king of the north, who's Trump. The years 289 BC and 1941, however, tell us the opposite. They say that the king of the north will defeat the king of the south. But remember, 289 BC and 1941 are in alpha histories, so they must be flipped. And after you flip them, they will show the same thing as 279 BC. In 2019, we clearly saw Putin defeat Trump. All over the Middle East, countries were changing their allegiance from the United States to Russia. This battle was fought with information, just as Asculum was won by elephants. We also see in 1941 that Germany, the King of the North, which would in our history be flipped to the King of the South, breaks a treaty between it and Russia, which in our history would be the USA, by invading them. The year before, in 1940, there had been friendships between Germany and Russia, when they stopped being friends, but their friendship recovered. This very thing happened the year before 2019, in 2018. Trump and Putin had been friends, but they began fighting the Battle of Heraclea in February of 2020 that ruined their friendship. But later, when Trump finally submitted to Putin, they became friends again. But their friendship was again broken, just like in 1941 when Putin broke the treaty and defeated Trump. So in 2019, we saw the Battle of Asculum.
2021 Battle of Beneventum. 287 BC, 275 BC, and 1945 parallel 2021 in our outline. We have to make the distinction between an alpha and omega history. Pyrrhus's actions in Macedonia, which was everything before he went to Italy, represent an alpha history. Pyrrhus's actions in Italy represent an omega history. World War II is also an alpha history. The difference between alpha and omega histories is that omega histories, or in omega histories, the king of the north and the king of the south are flipped, meaning the actions of the king of the north represents the actions of the king of the south, and the actions of the king of the south represents the actions of the king of the north. So in 287 BC, Pyrrhus joined the Allies and Demetrius was defeated. In 1945, the USSR helped defeat Germany. Since both of these events were in alpha histories, if Pyrrhus was the king of the south and Demetrius was the king of the north, then it's flipped. So Pyrrhus represents the king of the north attacking and defeating the king of the south. The same is for 1945. The king of the south was the USSR defeating, and they defeated the king of the north representing Germany. But since it's an alpha history, it's flipped. So that represents the king of the north defeating the king of the south. And since 275 BC is an omega history, when Rome, which is the king of the north, defeats Pyrrhus, which is the king of the south, we don't have to flip anything. So when everything is flipped to its proper order, we see that all these three histories represents the Battle of Panium when the king of the north, the United States, defeated Russia, the king of the south, in an information war. So 2021 was the Battle of Beneventum, or you can call it the Battle of Panium, either way. And that's when the king of the north, the United States, defeated the king of the south, Russia, in its information war.
(2021) to the Sunday Law. We are now between 2021 and the Sunday Law. And this time period is specifically marked in these lines that we have been looking at. On both the lines of Pyrrhus in Macedonia and World War II, this period is a Cold War, 287 to 285 BC and 1945 to 1989, respectively. In Pyrrhus's time, it was a Cold War between Lysimachus and Pyrrhus. In World War II, it was between the USSR and the USA. From both of these histories, we see that the king of the south is defeated at the end. This tells us that Russia, the king of the south, will lose the Cold War, and that's going on now between the United States, and that failure and culminates at the Sunday Law. On the line of Pyrrhus in Italy, in this time period between the Battle of Beneventum and the end of the line, which happened to be in 272, there is a waymark. The waymark is 273, and that is when Egypt sent ambassadors to Rome acknowledging their victory of the Pyrrhic War. This signifies the world recognizing that the United States, the king of the north, is a superpower after Russia is defeated at Panium. I just want to mark how we said the alpha the alpha histories are histories of failure, and the outcomes are flipped, whereas omega histories are success and they're not flipped. That really only applies to battles, because as you can see when I mentioned the Cold Wars in this time, the King of the South is defeated in both alpha histories, World War II, and Pirates of Macedonia. So I do want to make that distinction. It can be a bit confusing, but in this case, they're not flipped. The King of the South is the one that dies at the Sunday Law. So the invasion of Ukraine, and the picture you see on your screen is Russian soldiers preparing for, like, preparing to go fight in Ukraine. The invasion of Ukraine that is currently going on is just a proxy war, and a proxy war in the last Cold War between the King of the North and the King of the South, like we saw before 1989. During that Cold War, there were proxy wars. The invasion of Ukraine is one of them that's going on right now. And we can see that it's not doing Russia any good. So this is the time we're living in now, according to these lines, when Russia falls and this Cold War is going on between Russia and the US. So between 2021 and the Sunday Law, there is a Cold War, the fall of the USSR, proxy wars as well between the USA and Russia. Did I say USSR? Russia, not the USSR. The USSR is gone.
The Sunday Law. In 285 BC, Pyrrhus, the king of the south, lost everything but Epirus to Lysimachus, who was the king of the north. This was a partial loss. In 1989, the USSR, who was the king of the south, lost all of its sphere of influence except Russia to the USA, who was the king of the north. This too was a partial loss. Both 285 BC and 1989 are waymarks from Alpha histories. In 272 BC, Pyrrhus lost everything, including his own country, because he was killed. This was from an Omega history, so it more closely resembles our history. At the Sunday Law, Putin will lose everything, including Russia. In 272 BC, Pyrrhus was killed, but this doesn't necessarily mean Putin will be killed. We do know, however, that his own people will remove him and Russia will die. So at the end of the line is the Sunday Law, where Putin will lose everything and Russia will die. In summary, go to the next slide. The next slide after this. Okay, yeah, this slide. So we looked at the line of World War II and World War III, so from history and then our history. So 1929, we saw the Lateran Treaty was signed by Mussolini, and Hitler's party became the biggest party in Germany, and then Stalin removed all of his opponents. We mark this as when they all began to become dictators. Then we saw the 10-year proxy war, which we also saw from 1979 to 19. Yeah, Hitler's party became the second biggest party. And then we saw the 10-year proxy war from 1929 to 1939, and then also from 1979 to 1989. In 1939 at the end of 1939 is when we saw the end of the Spanish Civil War, which is what we mark as the 10-year proxy war. Then on August 23rd, 1939, we saw the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was between Germany and the USSR. And we saw the two parts of this pact, which were the non-aggression and then also redrawing the maps for both countries to have their sphere of influence. On September 1st, 1939, we saw the invasion of Poland. This is when Germany staged an attack on themselves and then used that as an excuse to invade Poland. But prior to that, or right before they staged the invasion, Britain had gone into alliance with Poland, and so they wanted an excuse to invade Poland, which I don't know, it was something. And then because they invade Poland, Britain and France declared war on Germany, which began the Second World War. And this was the three allies, France, Britain, and Poland, against Germany, who was backed by Russia at the time because of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And then in August 1940, we saw Russia suspending trade to Germany. This is because Russia and Germany never liked each other. And so Russia did not want to see Germany becoming too strong in the war, because ultimately they wanted Germany to be defeated, and they saw Germany gaining too much power, so they decided to take trade away from Germany to weaken them. On June 22nd, 1941, this is officially when the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was broken, because Germany invaded the USSR and it was known as Operation Barbarossa. Then in 1945, we saw the beginning of the Cold War to 1989. And in 1945 was the end of the war, and this is when Russia joins the Allies to defeat Germany, the USSR joins the Allies to defeat Germany. And this is the beginning of the Cold War between Russia and the USA, because those are the two remaining superpowers. And in 1989, the USSR even loses the Cold War, and they lose everything. And we saw that was marked on November 9th when the Berlin Wall fell. Then in our history, to line up, we saw the proxy wars for 10 years between 1979 and 1989. 1989, as we saw, was the end of the Cold War. This parallels the end of the Spanish Civil War, because this was the end of the Soviet-Afghan War. And we saw that this was countries changing their allegiances from the USSR to the USA. And in Pyrrhus, this was countries changing their allegiance as well in Pyrrhus' history. Then in 2014, we saw the invasion of Ukraine. This was the King of the South attacking its own sphere of influence, or Russia invading Crimea. And then we also saw collusion between the King of the South and the King of the North, who at the time we saw represented by Putin and Trump. And then this collusion was eventually used in 2016, or the 2016 election. And we saw in this election that Trump was represented by Demetrius, Clinton was represented by Antigonus, and Pyrrhus was represented by Putin. And Clinton, as we know, lost the election, and this is represented by Antigonus being killed in the battle. And so we saw the three branches of the government against Pyrrhus and Demetrius, who was Putin and Trump. In 2018, we saw the Battle of Heraclea, which we did not go into much detail about, but we did see that it was tension between Putin and Trump, or the King of the North and the King of the South. And in the history of Pyrrhus, this was when Pyrrhus defeats Rome for the first time. So this would be representing by Putin defeating Trump for the first time. In 2019, we saw the next battle, or the Battle of Asculum. This is when the King of the South defeats the King of the North. This is when, in our history, will be represented by Putin defeating Trump. In 279, Pyrrhus defeats Rome, or the King of the South defeating the King of the North. But then in the two other histories we looked at, which was 289, we saw Demetrius defeating Pyrrhus, and then in 1941, we saw Germany defeating Russia. So these are the King of the North defeating the King of the South. And that's because these are in alpha histories, so we have to flip them so that they line up correctly in our history, or in Omega history. In 2021, we saw the Battle of Beneventum. This is when the USA defeats Russia, or the King of the North defeating the King of the South. So in the previous two histories, the King of the South had been defeating the King of the North, and in this last battle, the King of the North beats the King of the South. In 275 BC, this is when Rome defeats Pyrrhus, so this lines up correctly, the King of the North defeating the King of the South. But in two other histories, 287 BC, this is when Pyrrhus defeats Demetrius, and then in 1945, this is when the USSR defeats Germany. So again, those are alpha histories, so we have to flip them, so it'll be the King of the North defeating the King of the South, instead of the King of the South defeating the King of the North. And then lastly, between 2021 and the Sunday Law, we also saw a Cold War. This would be the Cold War between the USA and Russia. I was going to say USSR. USA and Russia, we see a Cold War tension between the two countries. And then lastly, at the Sunday Law, we see the end of the Cold War, or when Russia loses everything. So previously in 1989, the USSR lost everything but Russia, so it was a partial loss. They still had something left. But at the Sunday Law, it will be a total loss because everything will be lost, such just as when Pyrrhus lost everything, including his life. And I think there's in the next slide, it also shows the lines of Pyrrhus. Next slide. So on this side, it also showed what we just talked about, but all the lines lined up as well.
So does it, excuse me, does anybody have any questions or comments about the lesson? Or questions or comments about the message in general, if it's not just about the lesson in specific?
If you didn't already know, this is it's not like a total repeat, but we are reviewing what we have already done more in depth before. It's lessons 17 to 21, I believe. You can find it under topics of the world wars on our website. You can also find all of Daniel under Daniel and Revelation, which is how we got into Pyrrhus in the first place. So if you do want a bit more detail and a bit slower, you can always go back and look at those lessons, the notes, the videos, even the slides.
And we have a question, when did the Cold War start? And well, there was a Cold War from 1979 to 1989 between the United States and Russia. That 10 years.
I know I mentioned when I did my, sorry.
No, I was finished.
Finish. Okay, I know I mentioned in my paragraph that we're going to say 1945 to 1989. There are some like historians who like to say 1947, but we say 1945 because that's the end of the World War II, and the USA and the USSR are no longer friends anymore. So now they're going to start butting heads because they're the only two superpowers, and that ends, of course, when the USSR falls in 1989.
Oh yeah, did I say 1979 to 1989? I meant 45, sorry. Anyway.
The Gulf War. Also, what caused the Gulf War?
The Gulf War.
We'll have to get back to you on that one. It's not really part of this. I mean, it is possible, of course, but yeah, we'll get back to you on that.
If you do have come up with any questions from now to the complete end of the lesson, you can always put them in the chat or say them or email us.
Now it is quiz time. You can say the answers or type in the chat. Question number 1. When is the 10-year period? 10-year period. On our line. We have a D, a G. Another 2 more Ds. Okay. Yes, correct. Before 1989, on our line, the 10 years was from 79 to 89. That was the Soviet-Afghan War. You also had the Syrian War in there. So those were proxy wars, part of the Cold War as well, but we're specifically marking that 10-year period to parallel 29 to 39 in World War II. Next question. What time period are we in now? What time period are we in now? We have an A, a G, okay. We have an A. The answer is A. We're in the Cold War where the King of the South dies between Panium 2021 or Beneventum in this lesson until the Sunday Law. There's the Cold War between the USA and Russia where the King of the South or Russia dies at the Sunday Law. Question number 3. What 3 battles are in our line or in our time according to the lines that we went over in this lesson? So this lesson, the 3 battles. And last lesson as well. G, C, a G, I think the answer is G, but that's a C anyway. Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum. That's a typo, sorry. But Heraclea, Asculum, and Beneventum are from the line of Pyrrhus. Heraclea, 2018, Asculum, 2019, Beneventum, 2021. I know someone put, I don't remember what letter it was, but that said Heraclea, Raphia, and Panium, which are in our time, but we didn't talk about Raphia and Panium in this lesson specifically. We didn't talk about them historically. Of course, Raphia and Panium just parallel Asculum and Beneventum, but we talked about these 3. They're from the history of Pyrrhus, so that's why they're technically the correct answer. Question number 4. Are we a history of success? E. Are we a history of success? Also known as an omega history. We have an H. Are we a history of success? Sorry. So we looked at histories of failure, histories of success, alpha histories, omega histories, where you have to, something in alpha history, like the outcome of a battle specifically, has to be flipped. So are we a history of success? Are we an omega history? We have some E's. Okay. And that is correct. We are a history of success and alpha history, not an alpha, and omega history, a history of success. That's why what happens in Pyrrhus and Macedonia and in World War II, the outcomes of those battles have to be flipped because ultimately those histories failed. So whoever wins the war was a failure. So it has to be flipped to our time when we apply it. So yes, we are a history of success. Last question. Who is the king of the North in World War II? So was the USSR. Who was the king of the North in World War II? B. B. Who was the USSR fighting in World War II? Because we know we can look at these battles through the lens of the king of the North versus the king of the South. In our time, that's USSA. That's the USA versus Russia. In the time of World War II, that was the USSR versus who? I've kind of lost track of the B's. I have one F, and D. I have a D, another B, B. Okay, correct. It's Nazi Germany, B. We even saw fascism, which is behind Nazi Germany, was allied with. Oh, is someone saying something? Has someone been talking this whole time? I can't hear. Hello? Oh, I believe someone, your mic is on, and like we can just hear you talking. Could that be taken care of? Okay, sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so Nazi Germany. We even saw how fascism, which is the root of Nazism, Nazi Germany, was allied with the papacy with the Lateran Treaty in 1929. So Nazi Germany is the king of the North in World War II. The USSR is the king of the South. And they are the ones that are fighting through this whole war. We saw the proxy war before the war started between fascism and communism, the treaty, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, where they pretended to be friends, like Trump and Putin, and then it eventually gets broken, and they start fighting. King of the North versus King of the South. Nazi Germany was the king of the North. USSR was the king of the South. So, congratulations, everybody. Thank you all for participating.
So thank you everybody for coming. If you have questions like Eric had, you can email us at youthprophecygroup@gmail.com. We also can send you notes, updates, or recordings from the meetings. And you can also find all of the previous lessons, notes, slides, and notes and slides on the website at youthprophecygroup.org and the videos on YouTube. And our next meeting will be on December 3rd, 2023.
Now let's close in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us to another meeting where we can discuss your message. Thank you for letting us understand how, excuse me. Thank you for letting us understand how the world wars and the Diadochi Wars parallel the events in our time, and for letting us know what exactly is going to happen in the future with the fall of Russia. Thank you for letting us be in the movement, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to be part of the 144,000. In Jesus' name, amen. Bye. Thank you for coming. Bye.